Sparky Coach Lounge Room Pod featuring James Hipwell or Jimmy Hip, straight out of Oyster Bay, actually. You grew up in, yeah?
Yeah, Oyster Bay.
Born and bred. So we've been really close mates for a long time now, maybe 20 years.
Yeah, I'd say at least.
Maybe I always forget that I'm 41. It doesn't do like that.
20 years since we were kids.
Fun fact, I actually married you in the most PG way possible. I was a celebrant for you and Alex. I think that was my first wedding. So so good, or one of the first. So but tell us a bit. So you're a builder. Your dad was a linesman.
Yeah,
right?
so
Sparky.
Dad's a linesman for Ausgrid. He's still doing that now, and yeah, I'm a builder. So I guess first, thanks for having us on. Sort of chat about this all the time, but it's good to be on here and give some insight.
No, it's good to have you on. I think the purpose of the pod was like just anyone listening to their first time was just to bring lounge room conversations to the public, and just basically just chat about, you know, people, why they started business, what they found hard, what they find easy, a bit of a natural skill set, how you diversified in this spot. So give us a bit of a run through, because you run Hipwell Projects, which is a bit like a luxury development business now. Is that kind of
that's sort of that's kind of, I guess, what we're doing at the moment. It's we're sort of in a bit of a transitional stage currently, where as we're sort of progressing, like, we do find enjoyment in the development side of the business, and we've sort of fluctuated from development to then take on heaps of client work and then go back to development. So at the moment we're sort of transitioning over from a model that kind of has predominantly been a mixture of client work and development, and trying to focus that more down the development path.
Yeah, I mean, what's the major differences for you? I guess it's just doing it for yourself versus doing it for others.
Yeah, I guess there's that side of it, and then it's sort of, you've got to take on a lot more work to kind of, for the same profits if you were doing the client work. Like, obviously there's different risk factors as well, where you're working for somebody else, they're making a lot of the decisions. When it's in-house, we can kind of really refine how we do it and make the decisions quickly, efficiently. A lot of the decisions we make can kind of, I guess, help the project come sort of the directions we need it to sort of tick all the boxes.
Yeah, I guess the big thing is, I guess, variations comes to mind. Like, who do you have to push a variation through for yourself? And no one, just Alex.
Yeah,
Call Alex, just do it. Yeah.
Yeah. So Alex is my wife, who she does a lot of the admin side of the business. And I guess from the client work that we take on, that was super admin heavy. So now it gives her more time to sort of spend that time on the design and the finishes and selections and things like that, which she enjoys doing. So that's sort of also a big part of it, that like we sort of have to enjoy doing it to stay as motivated as we are.
Now, I wouldn't. This is interesting. I wasn't even planning on going down this path, but Alex is an absolute weapon. You would have to agree.
Yeah.
How on earth did she land you? Crazy, absolutely crazy. But you would be one of the rare husband-wife teams, and even you were, I guess you were boyfriend and girlfriend at that stage when she started out with you guys. How do you find the husband-wife dynamic? A lot of times it doesn't work, but for you guys, it does seem to work. So my whole theory is always, if the wife, I always see people in the calculator side of things just try and like slip their wife in there, and I'm like, is she actually doing things or not? Because if she's not, we can't on cost her. You know, you can pay her, but that's your own business. Don't put it through my calculator. But you know, a lot of times my theory is, if it's not working, it doesn't have to work. And also, she's got to be able to be, it's like she's got a job to do. You can't just be like, oh, I've got the kids, oh, I've got this, I got that. If someone's partner's an admin, there's got to be an element of professionalism in the whole thing, that by the end of the week, I need this, this, and this done. And that would be awesome in the kindest way possible to kids and pick up and stuff like that. But why do you think it works for you? Because you would be in the 5 or 10%, I think. But what makes it work?
Yeah, I definitely see that it certainly isn't for everyone. And in the early stages, like it kind of didn't always happen smoothly. Like it took quite some time for her to learn the building elements of it and for me to understand a lot of the administrative sides of what she was setting up and kind of bringing to the business. But I guess where it sort of works is she already had her background in event management and then working for like marketing and events team. Like she worked for corporate events and super efficient. So like in terms of like touch typing, spreadsheets, absolute weapon. So then for her to be able to then have that skill set and then be invested within the business to a point where you don't have to be looking over their shoulder. Like you can completely trust that person to completely handle all of the admin. And I guess that sort of is where if you are doing it with your partner, they've got that financial investment as well, that they're not going to miss a progress claim, or you're not going to have to be going, hey, you forgot to invoice them $200,000 on that job. Like you can build that trust, and I'm sure you can with staff members in that role as well. But it's one of those things that's helped our business grow.
And like obviously, I always preach admin. Like I just think too many high level business owners get caught in the low level mundane administration tasks. So like obviously, at this like Alex's ability aside, which is obviously of a really high level, how do you find that having that weapon admin? It must just be game changing to your day to day life.
Well, I guess it's sort of changed. Like I would also probably be one of the only builders that I know that's sort of my age with the business in the position that it's in. But I would say that I'm primarily site based. So obviously there's like time that has to be spent on design and in the office and things like that. But having someone that can completely steer the ship, completely be fully trusted to sort of run that element of the business allows you to sort of do the work that you're trained to do, you specialize in. And not saying that I've sort of also got an administrative background as well with like the project management side of what I've sort of done previously. But I do enjoy still the daily being on the sites, running the jobs myself. And that isn't actually achievable unless you've got someone completely controlling the admin.
Yeah, 100%. Now, talk to us a bit about what does day-to-day life look like for you in Hipwell Projects? Have you got a team? You're obviously doing client work and development, so you've got a good team of subcontractors, I'm assuming. But what you got staff, or are you subbies, or how do you work that at the moment?
Yeah, so that's sort of been one thing we've sort of done differently is for years, like a lot of our work is in-house. So where a lot of builders would be contracting out their pools, their slabs, their frames, we've had an in-house team that does all of that. So I guess that's what like has sort of me being on site, running those teams. That's kind of what we've done. So still do have a team, but as we're I guess taking on less projects in terms of numbers of active projects at one time, but trying to sort of increase the complexity of those projects. So the builds from where we started to where they are now, we're constantly, I guess, improving. And that's sort of the next wave that we're looking to transition into with the development side of things is larger scale projects, more complex projects. And to sort of transition successfully, we don't want to have too much happening in the background at the same time.
And what's the dream like? So what jobs you got on the run at the moment?
Yeah, so we've where I am at the moment. So this is a duplex in Carringbar South that that I'm in for this meeting. But we recently finished this, so this is currently for sale at the moment. So this is a project we just completed. Then we're building in Woolaware, and we've got another project which is sort of just coming out of design stage in Carringbar South. So all three of those projects are for ourselves at the moment.
Keeping it local. I love it.
Yeah, we don't leave the Shire for much.
It's so good. Okay, sweet. So wanted to go through sort of your journey as a chippy turned sort of 50 staff business. What's the word? Mogul? Mogul? I don't ever know. It's Mogule. How that's pronounced? The business sort of tycoon. You were one of the first one in our friendship group to really get into property, and I think don't want to paraphrase what you heard, but I think you were at uni, and then someone was giving a lecture, and the guy was like, "This is what 2000 and something." 3, 4, 5. He was like, Sydney's a box. It can't go east because of the water. Can't go north national park. Can't go south national park. Can't go west because of the mountains. Buy somewhere in Sydney. And you really like, a couple of places in Western Sydney early on. So you were right on the ball right on the forefront of lots of things. But talk us through. So you did your carpentry apprenticeship and then straight into building, into project managing. Is that my understanding of that?
Yeah. So it's funny, that story you mentioned was actually Harry Triggerboff. Like, I don't know why he would be talking at a uni, and there was like surely at the point that he's at in his career, he's sort of not needing to do that, but the place was packed with everyone from big companies that come to sort of listen to him speak. But yeah, back to sort of that question you were asking. So I guess initially started as a carpenter. So I did my apprenticeship in carpentry, and while I was doing my apprenticeship, I did my builder's course at nights at TAFE. So builder carpenter was sort of where I started. So that apprenticeship was mainly eastern suburbs based. Like, I had a really good company that I was working for, Classic Home Improvements, and they had sort of top Sydney architects, really luxury, nice work.
What sort of style of work, like sort of high-end resi, like single dwellings or any multi-dwellings, or what sort of was it?
Yeah, so like there was new builds in terms of like a lot of the work that the builder did was fed through one or two particular architects that sort of had that excellent reputation. So sort of high net worth clients, new builds, foreclosed renovations on properties that I guess these days would be like, I don't know, $40-50 million. Like, you got
It's like Dr. Evil. Somebody's gone like $1 million, but now it's so funny. Yeah, sorry, continue.
Yeah, so that was sort of I guess where I started. And then so following on from my builder's course, so we're probably only 3 years in at this point. So carpentry apprenticeship, 3 years at TAFE, second and third year did my builder's course at nights. So then when I was in the fourth year of my apprenticeship, I simultaneously started a uni degree. So then that's sort of where I guess I was always super interested in the residential sector, and that's sort of back what we're doing now. But when I went to uni, already qualified as a carpenter, you're sitting in a classroom filled with these cadets working for companies, letting out contracts on commercial projects for carpentry. And at that point, you're the only carpenter that they know. So just that network changed our direction temporarily. And that's sort of, I guess, where you mentioned those projects where, I don't know, mid-20s, we kind of 50 guys on various projects around Sydney was
Don't just brush over that part. Like how did you end up mid-20s with like 50 staff members? And like what how did it get to that? Obviously, you had an opportunity and you sort of took it, and then maybe you didn't know how to say, you would just say yes, figure it out later. Like how did it go from I've got this cool opportunity to 50 staff, which is kind of psycho in the best way possible?
It was like, it sort of caught me by surprise, because obviously coming from that sort of residential background, you're not expecting like that sort of volume of work to be coming at you and thrown at you all that quickly. But
and what was the style? Was style of work was like just quite basic, yeah, like skirting, architrave. Like, was that sort of like windows kind of vibe?
It was really diverse, because that particular client that you're referring to, we did a lot of the high-rise units and things. So we do doors, skirtings, windows, and I guess you'd call that fairly straightforward, easy work. Like, it wasn't overly complex, but was just repetitive. But then that same builder that we're doing that work for was also building $8 million builds on his own private properties, and we're doing that work as well through some of the contacts I had at uni. Like, we'd be renovating pubs and clubs. So then that was so the work definitely varied, and the staff that we had.
I reckon anyone sort of between that 35 to 50 range from Sydney or the Central Coast, I reckon there's like a carpenter builder. There's a very high chance they work for you at some point. Don't you reckon?
There was a point in time where it was like, not that I would, like, I certainly hadn't lost track of who was working. And when you say there was 50 staff, like, some of those guys were like, there were teams. So amongst that, there were subby teams, and of those subbies, they might have 3 or 4 of their own guys, but they were predominantly smaller businesses or direct employees that you were sort of having to, we'd price this work, or we'd have the work as a cost plus kind of element of what we're doing, but you would still have to make sure the work was delivered, oversee it. So that was, I guess, a stage of my business growth that I didn't see coming. It was sort of an opportunity that came up, and we sort of ran with it, and I'm grateful for it now. But we've probably used that opportunity to get us in a position that can steer back more towards our initial goals of that property developing.
Yeah, it's classic sort of use what's in your hand to fulfill what's in your heart. Like, so many people start out, it might not be what you like necessarily wanted to do or thought, but if you do that, it puts you in a position to get across. Now, funny story, I remember you were at a, I'm going to speak for you. You're at a wedding and you go, "Oh, hi, I'm James," and introduce yourself to someone. And the guy's like, "Oh yeah, I worked for you for 3 years." Like, and that's not all a blemish on your character. It's just the show of almost how out of control the sort of subby teams, not out of control, in control, but how wide that reach was if you had that subby team of 4 of sort of coming in and doing the work, which has always been
I remember that, actually. That was Richard Jarman's Bucks party, and it was Isaac. So if you're listening, I did remember you, but you did have long hair at the time, and it had been 5 years, and you were from the Central Coast working. So we hadn't seen each other for a while, but I certainly remembered him, but I didn't recognise him in that moment.
So good. But yeah, so how do you, because obviously, what did you study at uni? Was it project management?
So it was construction management and property. So the degree that I did then has changed a little bit now. It used to be a 4-year degree where you'd sort of do 3 years of construction management, and you'd sort of pick a subject you'd major in. So that was where people could be building surveyors. I was in certifiers or facilities managers. So I chose property, which I guess some of the things that you'd sort of property law, property valuation, it was kind of, I guess, construction management, but then there was a separate element of property, which was always sort of, prior to even starting, was sort of an interest of mine. So yeah, there was the construction management aspect, but there was also just the property, like, in general.
Yeah, and then talk us through the sort of management of that many staff. I think I went to a Christmas party of yours with your brother, and then like you think your mum dropped us off or something, and I was young and didn't really know what you were doing at that point, and then there's like 60 people, just maybe more, there was 80 people at where's that yacht club in the
the one on Woolaware Road.
Woolaware Yacht Club. And I was like, who is this guy? What's happening? It was so cool to see. But managing that level of people, one thing we were discussing sort of earlier, the payment terms might have caught you a little off guard. So what were the payment terms at that stage? Was it 90 days?
Yeah, so that was probably the hardest part of that business. And I was sort of lucky in the early stages. as a younger guy, like, I guess that kind of helps because I could probably even sort of relate to that now, that when you're young, you sort of know all of these people. Like, I wouldn't have the connections that I'd have at that age in social settings, from sports, from friends of friends at this stage of life. Like, you still do, but most of them have already got their own established businesses. They're not looking for carpentry work. They've sort of already got their own stuff happening. So that was sort of, I guess, yeah.
Like right,
I'll
sort
just
of
clarify.
right place, right time, and not because it's like I don't know if like would you take the risk these days is another question. Like not if you didn't have to. I remember the story of I think you had I think Raul, like Alex was telling me the story with you guys had 90-day payment terms when you first started having all these staff, and there's all this money outstanding, but you were sitting on the floor eating noodles waiting for the pay to come in like next week or in a couple of days or something like that, because it's like we'd exhausted the money. So huge risk. And full credit to you for taking that sort of full on. What's your advice to someone on a payment term? So how do you take that into consideration when you're quoting, and or is it just like, obviously you're sort of governed by the principal contractors or who you're subcontracting to, you're sort of governed by their ebbs and flows and their
Yeah.
payment terms?
So sorry, I sort of lost track of that. That was the question you asked previously. So with the payment terms, I guess in the early stages, there was a shortage of people they could find that could deliver, I guess, in terms of the quantity of work that they had, and I guess some of the quality of work that they had on their higher end builds. Having a company that had heaps of staff couldn't deliver high end work, and people that could deliver high end work couldn't do the volume. So we sort of found we had the ability to negotiate the payment terms in the early stages to try and, like, 30 days from the end of month, and then they were always a couple of weeks late. So I guess looking at that at a calendar, you could potentially work all of January, submit your invoice on the 28th, then it was 30 days from the end of that month. So from the end of February, they're looking to pay. Then quite often, I guess it was probably even strategic on their part, they're always a couple of days late. So by this point, you've worked all of January, all of February, and you're in the middle of March and potentially like waiting for payment at that point. So
Yeah, so you're 75 days out with 30 to 40 to 50 staff, and it's technically not even that overdue.
So it's a couple of days overdue, and that's sort of where you're at. So in the early stages, and it obviously didn't start with that many people, like that sort of maybe was a bit of a, I don't know, 6 to 7 year period we were doing that type of work. And we kind of grew into that volume you sort of referred to before. So in the early stages, a lot of the high end work, it's like, look, if you want us to go and work on these projects, like, we want to be paid fortnightly. And when they kind of were limited to who they could get to do the work, they sort of tended to agree. Like, some of the projects were in Goulburn and outside of Sydney too. So like it's not as if they're spoilt for choice on who they can actually get that they trust and have already built a relationship with. So that helped in the early stage. But as we grew, they sort of pushed us back onto those payment terms that everyone else was sort of on, that 30 days from end of month. And I guess when everything was going smooth, it wasn't too bad. But then like there was a bit of a period where these companies that you thought were like absolutely killing it run into their own financial troubles, I guess. And that's where it's sort of potentially a little bit naive at the time of like the risk you're actually taking just to simply operate that service.
Yeah, that's huge. And if you don't know where this is heading, the was sort of like the company heading into sort of liquidation administration, the principal contractor at this point. So like obviously the naivety of, I think that young, I mean, look at us talking like to advice to the young kids, but the feeling of I'm bulletproof, that won't happen to me. oh, I don't know, that company's going good. They're doing this job, this job, this job. On face value, it might look really rosy. And you know, what are some of the key signs? I know for me, I had 3 builders sort of go down at certain points, and one of the signs for me was always if they were like sinking lots of money into their own personal houses. Not all the time, like not every single time, because people are entitled to develop their own house, of course. But looking back, I think the couple of like warning signs I saw was payments dragging out later than usual. And that's kind of cooked because then they sort of got you over a barrel, right? Like they owe you 60 to 80 days of labor and materials. And then you can't, if you don't go, like there's no incentive for them to pay you. But if you do go, you're racking that bill out from 60 to 70 to 80 to 90, like the bill's increasing and the likelihood's going down. So like would you have noticed anything differently? And even if you did, could you have even done anything about it because of the payment terms situation?
Well, the payment terms certainly put you between a rock and a hard place in that situation because you are already that invested, and there's usually a backstory. Like it's pretty rare that anyone just honestly tells you their situation if they are kind of in that financial position that's, oh, well, we're just waiting on the bank to pay the progress claim. And if you get all of this work finished and we can get that section of the job released and the scaffold down, then the banks are going to release this huge payment. And there was always a story that potentially went with it. And on 6 or 7 years of rapport and history of someone always paying, like, I guess that's sort of where you can end up in that, like, I guess you probably believe them when in hindsight you could probably see some of those signs that you're a little bit blind to at the time.
Yeah, you're talking about like busy business owner working really hard, calling someone they've had a relationship with for 5 to 7 years, them saying, yeah, it's cool, and you going, okay, cool.
Yeah.
You know, like it's not
it's sort of
far-fetched. Yeah. It's not really, and you got your own personal stuff going on as well. So like what if you don't mind me asking, like what ended up sort of like happening? How did you go in it? Like what would you do differently? What advice would you have to someone who's going through that or gone through that sort of situation? So essentially they went down owing you X amount of money, which was a lot to my knowledge. Yeah, what advice, like what did you learn through that period?
Yeah, well, it was not even just that particular company too. So we'd had a pretty good run for quite a few years, and we'd sort of diversified a little bit. So like whilst we had 1 or 2 major clients that we'd do a lot of the work for, and we'd sort of have different price structures too. So like the guys that are feeding us heaps and heaps of work, the rates were competitive. Like that was a super important part of the work. But then as you start getting a reputation of being able to deliver certain types of jobs, then we started branching out, working for other clients. And I'd sort of recall a period where we had 3 builders that had all kind of folded within a short space of time. And I guess that's when it kind of opened my eyes to the risks of the payment terms and the industry in general of, oh, hang on a sec, like this was all smooth sailing, but I guess we're fortunate that that didn't happen in our first 1 or 2 years of business. It happened 7 or 8 years down the track.
Yeah, imagine being in that stage of like, you know, eating noodles on the floor and that happens then. I mean, that's like maybe a life sort of situation. Not life, no one's gonna, like that's a big difference of that matter. So what yeah, like for Huge, talk to us a bit about, you know, getting those initial phone calls or you know, hearing about that, because I know other subcontractors. I think I reached out to you to get the electrical work at some point, and you were like, "Oh no, you don't want this unless you can hold a $3 million contract or like 4 $3 million contracts." I like, and I said, "Oh yeah, that's right. I'll just stick to my lane." Like this seems, and I think lots of people got cooked who were like sort of your friends. But it's not just that. It's when someone goes down, they owe you X amount of money, and then then, you know, you think it's, oh, well, I've lost X amount. And now here comes a preferential payment horse, just like riding into town, you just galloping in. And if you don't know what preferential payment is, essentially the administrators, when they take over a company goes down and the administrators take over, they get paid first. Then the banks get paid, and then the government, and then the employees and subcontractors. Is that the...
Yeah, so
Pretty
in other
close.
words, that there's an order of preference that people should be paid, and anything that was sort of paid out in the 6 months prior to the company going under, they can claw that money back and redistribute it. The only sort of problem is, in most cases, unfortunately, they claw that money back and then chew it all up as part of the administration process, which goes to the lawyers, the accountants, all the parties involved. And I'm sure some of that money does end up in the right hands, but quite often it's the secured creditors and the tax office. And unfortunately, the contractors are so far down that particular order of preference. The guys that are out there doing the work on a daily basis usually end up the most hard done by in that particular preference system.
Yeah, and your best effort to get someone to sign a secured contract is thwarted by their contract. Like that's essentially how that industry works. And it just to stop traffic there for a sec. So if you're owed 300 grand, this is for anyone listening, if you're owed 300 grand and a company goes in administration, they can essentially look at who was paid what in the last 6 months. So let's stop traffic now. We're in May 2025. So someone goes down now, they owe me 300 grand. They actually look back in the last 6 months, and they call it preferential payment. So in its whole purity, I guess it's a beautiful thing. So the company can't just siphon money to their friends and family and be, oh, I'm so sorry, I've gone under. But if they have paid good people who have continued to do the work, the administrators can come and sort of start to try, okay, who was paid in the last 6 months? Okay, well, that's not really rightfully your money because you got a preferred payment. We don't know why, but it's preferred, and they sort of try and claw that back. So how much of a learning curve was you going through that? Because I was fortunate enough to go through that after you and then get to talk to you about it. But how was that process? Like daunting, stressful, losing sleep, like, wanting to sort of maybe punch a wall at certain times. Just what talk us through that feeling?
Yeah, so there was a part of that where like it was fairly substantial amount. So initially, like, you're going, all right, well, we've lost that. That's sort of, okay, the administrators might get some of that money back, and you spend a lot of time dwelling on it. But then the real kick is when they go, oh, and by the way, you got paid and we want that money back so we can pay it back to the bank, because that guy that bought all of this excessive amount of property, like that's secured, like they should get paid first. So you can obviously defend preferential payments, that the money was in good faith and things like that. But for a liquidator, they've got 100 contractors that are pretty much all in the same boat. So their legal teams, every letter they write, they just print times 100, change the names. Like, they're sort of tackling everyone collectively. So they sort of know that they're probably going to get something. Like, if it's going to cost you 50 grand for each person to defend themselves, quite often they'll settle prior to it sort of going to court for the amount that you would have wasted in legal fees, win or lose anyway. So that's sort of the downside of it, that the money that we got paid in that 6 month time frame all was paid in good faith. It was all because the work we did was done. That was more so that that's just how that system worked. But the amount of time, money and energy that you'd have to put into it is usually what's not worth it. So if I did have that time again, I feel like that kind of situation was really disruptive to our actual business growth. So you get so caught up on this problem, you sort of forget, well, I've still got 15 other clients and the business is still operating. It's sort of, okay, like 1 or 2 of our major ones are gone, but you spend so much time looking back that you forget to look forward.
Yeah, and forget what's in your hand. I feel the same. And when I went through that, my first sort of person not paying, I think it took me, I tried to go down the Security Payments Act and then ended up in, I think it was like step 3 of that, which I can't remember. It's security payments, and it's the next level in the district court off the top of my head, something like that. And I remember like the lost time of head, it wasn't the time, it was the energy and headspace that could have been, it was the opportunity cost. If I had of just like, okay, sweet, can we settle that, roll out and move on? It's hard when it's, it's just interesting when it's $1,000 invoice. It's like, okay, what was my cost price? $600, sweet, let's just settle it 6. Cool, sweet. But when you're talking in the hundreds of thousands of dollars, it does become quite like full on and quite a lot more emotional, a lot more at stake. And I think I remember saying to you one time, let's just pull yourself out. If I had said to you 5 years ago, you'll make this money, but you'll lose this, would you do it? And I think you were like, yeah. And that was interesting. I think that perspective was interesting. It was really easy for me to say because I was like, wasn't in it.
But it was super helpful because, and that was what I mentioned earlier, that like I was super fortunate, and I probably would say there was some luck involved that it happened after a substantial amount of time of having things go right before something went wrong. Now, for sort of anyone that easily could have happened early on and been crippling. So that's where I guess service-based businesses or any businesses are on these payment terms, it's really important to factor in the risk. Like even if you don't really think that it could happen, like, well, if the business is so sure it's not going to happen, they could pay you weekly or they could pay you fortnightly. And often there's an excuse that, oh no, because we only do a pays once a month because we're such a big company. But like they sort of structure it that way for their own protection, but it leaves you very vulnerable.
Yeah, it can rack up massive bills. What advice would you have to someone who was, because I think people get an opportunity like that, I can have 50 staff or 30 staff or push all this revenue or whatever. I think sometimes people get that opportunity and think it's just a sign from the trade gods and want to launch headfirst into it without actually considering the risks. And most people I know, the majority of people couldn't run a team of 50 and have 75 like days out like that. That's a huge wage bill to sort of supplement in the interim. But like, what would you say to someone who had an opportunity? Like, what are the sort of warning signs, or what's the things to look at? So payment terms is obviously one. Are there any other sort of red flags, do you reckon, where someone's just looking at a price only, or how do you even tell that? Or what
the other thing, I guess, which you can kind of see is like the trades changing. So when everything was good, like it was the same electrician, the same carpentry team, the same plumber that was on these jobs. And it was kind of like the trades were so familiar that if we were doing the fix out, like we would be calling the painters and telling them it was done. And then we'd be calling the carpet guys and saying, hey, we're finished. So the job somewhat got efficiently managed by the trades themselves, like oblivious to the foreman and the people running the job. The trades had this intercommunication between themselves because we're looking out for each other's best interest, get there, like it's no point going if it's not ready. But then when the painter changes and the plasterer changes and all of a sudden it starts looking different, like obviously there's very ethical reasons that could happen. But sometimes it's like, oh, well, I can't afford to pay his bill, so we'll just get the next bloke because he's not aware. He thinks this opportunity is going to be great for him to come in and do this work. But the main reason he was using that trade retrospectively is probably because the other painter wouldn't come anymore. So I guess seeing that change of trades and lack of consistency, you could consider that as a warning sign, but not like there could be.
Yeah, I agree. It's kind of like the builder sinking a lot of money into his own house. It can be a warning sign, but it can just be a normal part of everyday life too. It's actually really difficult to see, I think. But I think you said it best before. and talked about supply and demand, how you're able to sort of demand payment terms when you had what they needed, but as they've got what you need. And I think that's the ebb and flow of sort of subcontracting 101, whether you're an electrician or in the service base or project base or whatever. If you've got something what someone needs, you're worth more to them. And if they've got what you need, you know, you're worth less to them. So it's like, it is actually an interesting ebb and flow. I want to touch, navigating that time. So your advice to yourself would be, you know, look out for some warning signs. Maybe minimize your exposure by diversification a little bit, which sounds like you were just sort of starting to do. And then, would you get legal advice in that situation, or would you sort of steer clear of it? Like, what would you?
Well, I definitely think it's worth having like knowledge of the payment terms that you're agreeing to, because quite often a lot of people are unaware of the whole Security of Payment Act as a whole, and even the preferential payments that you touched on. Like, most people don't find out about that until they're caught up in it the hard way. It's not something that you rock up to work and go, oh yeah, well, that could potentially happen tomorrow. Like, it's usually not until it's happened to you or someone that's close to you that you sort of gain that knowledge. So a lot of that learning, unfortunately, sort of happens the hard way. And that's, I guess, the benefit a lot of the coaching and mentoring you're doing for these trades that come through. Like, you've got that knowledge and experience to pass on. But
well, I remember, speaking of passing on, I remember when I went through the preferential payment thing, I think this one builder owed me 25 grand, and that was hurtful because I don't want to name, but you probably know what I'm talking about. But they were like friends of friends, and we just finished work on this guy's house in this like luxurious eastern suburb, and it was like a punish. Actually, the guy just added me as a friend on Insta the other day. But admittedly, I will come full circle on this, because and then I remember, so they made 25 grand and it really hurt, and I got wind of it through, I think we might have been at Wherry Beach where we had caravans, and I got wind of, oh, did you hear about this? And I'm like, nah, that one, I just spoke to them. They just they just gave me $1,000. They owed me 30 bucks. And then and I remember they preferential payment came for, like, I think it was 12 grand. It was quite minimal because I hadn't paid in a little bit. And I think we were fortunate enough to be in between stages. Anyway, so they hit me for 12 grand, and I took that letter that you had. That sort of, there's a case that sort of sets the precedent that's basically like, no person in their right mind would continue working for someone if they knew they were going into liquidation. So someone's sort of set a precedent, and I was like, well, no one in their right mind would continue doing this. But they had paid me $1,000 like 2 days before. So I was like, they came to me for 12. I wrote back for 1,200. They wrote back for 2 grand. I wrote back for 1,200. Yeah. And we signed it off. But I was like, that was a win in my head, because I was like, I knew enough at that point to be like, get out of my life. I just want to move on and focus. That hurt. What did I learn? A couple of warning signs were there, but it's genuinely really exposing, and like, it's so hard to know what to do in that situation. But thanks for that letter. I'm sure it cost you some money, but I got it for free.
Yeah, I actually remember, I still remember that. Actually, I'm like, oh, if it's like, honestly, if it's only you've received $1,000, like, let's just write the letter ourselves.
It's so good. And then you mentioned something before I want to touch on. And I think your knowledge of numbers is so comprehensive, and you've always been hyper switched on. You know, you're the person to sort of tell me to read tax books, and, you know, you're always like, you need to know that, it's not good enough. And I love your appetite for knowledge and consuming knowledge, but also retaining the knowledge. And you one of the smartest people I know. But talk to us about, I know, like, cost plus arms of businesses. I think me and you would agree it's one of the most misunderstood ways to grow a company. But you mentioned before wholesale rates too. Like, not everyone was on the same rate because people were giving you sort of more work, or holding that more work for a longer period of time. So you're at this job for 18 months. But talk to us about the importance of knowing those numbers and your theory on cost plus. That sounds like you have a theory on cost plus, but you don't. But you know what I'm saying? Like, talk to us about your, like, how you see that. I'd love to hear that.
Yeah, well, I guess I can probably relate to what we're doing previously with that contract work because that was a mixture of priced work and cost plus for some jobs as well. And then even what we're doing now, like I would say most of the trades we use today are cost plus. So I just found that the high-end houses that we worked on when I was an apprentice, the trades were on cost plus. Like the quality was more important than someone having to make their money off rushing it under the time that allowed for. And there's a flip side to that as well, because obviously people that are excellent at their job potentially aren't as rewarded on that cost plus system. Because if one person's coming in and hanging 10 doors and the other guy's doing 2, and they're both on the same hourly rate. So it's definitely a bit of a kind of blurred lines in terms of who it benefits when it suits best. But from a business growth model, it can help with like a lot of guys starting out. The thing that they do struggle with the most is probably their pricing, like knowing how long things take. And even if they know how long it takes them, it's not necessarily how long it's going to take their staff to do that same task. So it's got to add value to both parties. So I guess now looking at it from a builder's perspective on an electrician, for instance, doing cost plus, that if every little like PowerPoint that's added or every variation and things like that don't necessarily have to create the admin work, and the guys that are rocking up are professional, reliable, like they're working efficiently, then if your business is making money from offering that service and it's solving the problem for the builder, then that model is potentially working for both parties. It can kind of not work when, I guess, the service trade drags things out. They treat the work differently because it's cost plus. And then there's also the risk. So I'll refer back to like you did a lot of cost plus work as an electrician for us over the years, but I'm not sure how many times you could recall being back charged on cost plus. Like that's one of the grey areas. So, okay, what about the guy that just hung those 10 doors, but one of them binds, but the guy that hung 2, none of them bind? So then if you were to back charge the guy that just did 10 doors, he'll just slow down and only do 2, but just make sure there isn't one problem. So communication about what's expected, what you're looking for. Hey, this particular job, like we need you to be pumping it out. But in the event you get a fault, you get a little bit of a problem here or there, you can't really have someone on cost plus and then go and back charge them because one spotlight's got water in it. Like it's sort of, it has to be, I guess, an open relationship that both parties sort of agree to how it works.
Yeah, that's so huge. I think it's got to be what you said, like mutually beneficial to both parties. And one of our concepts at Sparky Coach, and one of our sort of like goals, is that people would finish the year with a market wage, including super. So what you could go into a company next door, 3 doors down and earn with a business net profit of 20%. And obviously you can earn more when you're on the tools because you're keeping more of that sort of wage component of your rate, whether that's packaged up in a price book or you're achieving efficiency by a labor materials quote, or you're on cost plus. So it's actually, but at the end of the year, if you're hitting that goal, if you're in a 3 mil turnover or 2 mil turnover and hitting that goal, that's an exceptional goal to hit of that, market wage, which is probably more like the 150 to 180 at that point, plus your business profit of net, 20% net. That's huge. And I don't think you care how you get to that point. If you get to that point, you're like, here's my market wage, net profit 20%. Or what portion was it cost plus? What portion was it quoted? You're not going to break it down to the micro level, but I do think it can be an incredibly underestimated arm where usually it's a no administration, no lead cost, like no advertising or anything like that. It's just like they call, you do. Usually you've got your what we call labor efficiency. So you've got your 8 hours a day, so to speak. There's no downtime because you're usually on site 8 hours a day. Or if it's not, the job doesn't go 8, you can usually drag both jobs or the 3 jobs to get to the 8 because that's the sort of nature of the relationship. Back charging does be really interesting because from I remember we were doing a lot of this pub work, and the builder said to me, "Oh, I've got you to take some hours off because you guys, I think we ran something that didn't quite need to be there, or the wrong spot or something like that." And I was like, "Oh, that's not really fair because we can't just cost plus, like if you're not gonna like celebrate our wins, you can't punish our losses. So, we roughed this in 5 days, not 7. I can't now charge you 7, which is my penalty for being."
That's what you would have factored into your quote.
Yeah, I would have quoted 7 and did in 5, and I'd be celebrating. But so if I'm not going to get rewarded for that, I can't be punished for my shortcomings. And in a job of this size, which is probably like 300 to 400 grand, that job, I'm like, I would have factored in X amount of mistakes. Like, it's not really fair. And we had a really good conversation about that, and he was like, "Yeah, that's a good point," and I'm like, "Yeah, sweet." And then we moved on. So, yeah, what's your advice? I know cost plus gets shunned a lot. And I think it maybe has a point if you're doing 2 downlights or hanging 2 doors, and it's something that's relatively predictable and quoted. Like, I fully agree with it. But what advice would you have to a young builder, young Sparky, young plumber coming through the ranks that gets offered an opportunity with a good client that's good work and a lot of work? How would you sort of skin the cat if you were that person?
Yeah, so I guess you can probably not one situation's going to fit like everyone in this kind of scenario. So for someone that's just fresh out of their apprenticeship, trying to grow their business, like get in with a couple of builders and kind of transition from doing a fan to actually roughing in an entire house, they're probably going to struggle on some of the pricing aspects. But if they're really good at their work, they hook in, they do a good job, a lot of builders like that particular worker more so than they probably like the older tradesman that just gets a junior, marks him up at top rate and sends him out. Like, they're pretty happy to give that guy a go, but then they've got to be able to deliver as well. Like, cost plus is never going to, like, most of the clients you're working for, I guess, that are running successful companies, they can read between the lines. Like, if there's a guy that's just sending his worst, slowest staff to fill out the last 3 hours of a day because they've finished their fan job, they're going to see pretty quick that system and that relationship isn't going to work for them. But if you can see someone that's trying to grow their business, have a go, and you can support that, like, that's sort of what builders, I guess, are looking for, because that up and coming kind of guy, like, I guess a lot of builders have already got their set trades, and if they're happy with them, then it's going to be hard to crack into that market, especially when they're loyal to who they've got. But it is a good way to kind of get your feelers out there fairly risk-free to both parties. And if it doesn't work, you're not, "Hey, you've just given me this $100,000 electrical contract, and one day in you realize I suck, and too bad you signed the contract." Like, it's
It's one of the most underrated aspects of cost plus is paid learning if you're organized. So if you're organized if you're young and up and coming, it can be a great way to get an opportunity to job where you don't have the pressure of quoting it. And anyone that's quoted a job a bit out of their realm will know exactly what I'm talking about. You're waking up at night thinking about cable pathways or ways you can save money. Oh my gosh, it's raining. What am I going to do? I've got an excavator coming in. Like, it's sort of like takes a lot of pressure off. And you can, if you can actually be diligent and log your hours against sort of cost centers, whether that's rough in, fit off, cut out, underground, switchboard, you can get a feel for how many hours it takes. And then you can apply a break even to that and a materials cost, and then put a margin on top of that for the next one. So it's actually incredible paid learning. There's no or minimal, I mean, you got to have a variation discussion. It's not a free for all, but there's no variation liability on both parties. So the end user can come and just be like, "Yeah, put that in, and it's not like, oh, that's 150, that's 200, that's 300. Or like, there's no real admin associated with it besides like a weekly invoice, which is pretty interesting, I think. But definitely, like you were saying before, if you're the person that's hanging 10 doors, you're way better off on a quote, obviously. So it's definitely one of those realms.
But then you've also got to factor in how many jobs do you quote that you don't get, and is that time accounted for in the jobs that you do get? Like, like you said before, where you've got repetitive clients that are just work. Oh yeah, I've got work for 2 guys. Actually, work's picking up. You can make that 5 guys, and you're growing your business into that environment without having to go back. Oh no, your door's $10 more expensive than the other bloke per door, so we're going to go with him, and it's all price driven of quotes. Then you've also got a lot of downtime. But
Yeah,
that advice
100%.
is very targeted to those growing businesses, younger guys. Like I watched some of your previous lounge podcasts with like Dave and Tom, and that would be like, there's no way they would be operating in those realms with their super technical experience in their field. That if they're, I guess for some things, like a lot of the programming stuff, but I could also imagine there would be jobs that Dave would be doing for Join where if it's not completely designed, but the project started and they're involved to design, there is going to be a moving price throughout that job. So if it's not cost plus, it's obviously the price is floating. You're not on a fixed quote. You couldn't be.
Yeah, it's a living and breathing document a lot of the times. Aircon's actually really different because it's usually like a relatively labor materials, like, what system have you got, how much labor, what grill is there,
Yeah.
where's the access panels, like just, that kind of stuff, where's the condensers located. They usually don't run any power, like, say RJ wouldn't. So a lot of that stuff, I would say 97% of their work could be quoted. I would assume Tommy would be the same besides his electrical stuff on the pub. Any automation stuff would be, unless it's sort of like a repair work or rectification, which you really can't quote, which a lot of times electrical is. It does cross boundaries. It's not that dissimilar to carpentry, elements of it in a way where if you come into an existing place, it's like, well, I don't know if that wall's straight. I don't know what's behind that. I don't know what's under that. Can this support it? So it's actually like a lot of variables, a lot of moving parts at certain points. But I think the skill set to come into a job and work out how to approach that, to read the person first and foremost. Okay, what do they want? So, I don't want to name anyone, but like, our biggest client was like he would take us out to his Christmas parties and his jobs were impossible to quote. There was no way he could quote it. They changed too much. There was too much going on. He'd have 4 running at once. He just wanted to walk in and be like, bang, bang, bang. I remember this is funny to talk about. I remember the guy, he'd have these psycho chandeliers worth God knows how much. And the guys were doing 2 a day. So they have to set the scaff up. Then we're talking cable out, timber in, switch on, just to fit off 2 chandeliers a day. And how would you even price for that? You wouldn't know to call that chandelier a $1,500 item on a price book or a quote. Like it's genuinely impossible. So I think it has to work both ways. Now coming into a wholesale rate, what would so when you say wholesale rate, did you quote at a different rate? So you quoted the sort of fixed price stuff at X rate and the wholesale rate, like how did you not negotiate, but how did you work out those rates and roll forward from there?
Yeah. So I guess like this is even a conversation that I sort of have with some of our staff, even today, in terms of like rates. Like if you're giving someone a large volume of work on a regular basis, like you would expect that rate to be less than what they would go and charge for a single ceiling fan that takes them an hour and they've got to try and get 8 of those in a day to fill their day up. But then it's really situational to how the stage of your business. And if you're trying to grow it, if you're happy with the client you got, if you're full in terms of capacity already on your discounted rate and you're trying to let go of some of that discounted work to increase to more profitable work. So it's got to be sort of situational. But then bringing it back to what I was saying as a discussion I'd have with staff, like not everybody is good at everything in any trade. So from a carpentry perspective, I've had staff that have done their whole apprenticeship doing doors, skirtings and fix out. Then they transition out of that because they want to be a builder. They want to build houses. They want to learn how to do a slab, how to build a pool. They would be worth top dollar if they were hanging doors every other day. But that particular rate they're worth in that element isn't the same rate they're worth on a different type of work in that field. So the same guy that might be great at putting up those chandeliers and doing all of that work mightn't be the same guy that's, if he wants to work on, I don't know, in factories doing all like heavy duty equipment and things like that from an electrical standpoint, if he wants to transition into that, like the rates sort of have to be negotiable in terms of the type of work and what they're getting out of it. Because once somebody is a tradesman and they're not your apprentice, if you're hiring them at top dollar, like the expectation is they can actually do that work without you having to teach them that work. But your learning doesn't necessarily stop when your apprenticeship stops. So if you transition to a new company and this guy that can do doors is worth $80 an hour on doors, he might not be the same value at doing a slab for his very first time. So that's sort of where, once again, it depends on the circumstance. And the guy that wants more experience might be happy to work at a lower rate until he gets that experience and it gets reviewed, or that's sort of where I don't know if that, I need to charge this rate fits every scenario.
Yeah, I'm a massive, like on our calculators, I'm massive on, I think I just put something on Insta actually before talking about, the standard rate Australia-wide for an electrician is $40 to $60 ex super. So, let's say it's 45 and 67. The operating cost for someone skinning a cat really, really tight in terms of, cost plus work they call you do, or quoted work they call you do, you've got the job. You got a even ratio of tradies apprentices or even one apprentice above to carry that operating expenses, to make it lighter. Certain style of work it's perfect for, certain style of work it's awful for. So you can skin the operating expenses between 25 and 55, like really 65 to be honest, but let's call it 25 to 55. So someone's break even tradie rate can literally range from $70 to $122. And that's a break even rate. So charging 110 per hour can be someone's 36% net profit or someone's negative 11% net profit. So just the importance of like knowing your market, knowing where you fit. And even on that, skinning a service-based company in two different ways where you can maybe apply 65% of the overheads to the Betty ceiling fans and 35 to the person giving you a whole bunch of work. There's so many options and there's so many ways you can sort of manipulate's the wrong choice of words, but maybe manufacture. It's like on surfing when they manufacture the fives, like they just like create the drama and like twist some things around. So I think knowing the numbers is such an incredible part of everyone's business, and that's the benefit of like say having a weapon admin like Alex, where she is probably the equivalent of 2.5 people in the office, but she rips and tears and gets it done with the same care, passion, love, energy, and financial concern as you. So you're on the same team, same page. Like that's worth its absolute weight in gold. Plus, you can't go anywhere because you've got 4 kids.
Yeah, that's part of it too. And I guess it gives me that luxury then to sort of make sure that labour is efficient, because without the efficiency of the labour, like just because you've got a company and you've got a factory and 2 admin staff and your guy costs you $130 an hour is what you have to charge for that guy to be worth having, that doesn't necessarily mean he's worth that to the consumer. So just because your numbers stack that way, quite often you'll find that some guys are super productive, can pump out the work, and like quite often that'll actually bring their overall rate down because you're getting through more jobs, you kind of
Got those repeat comments as well, like because clients they're watching, whether you know it or not, like they're always watching. It's huge. Hey, I was gonna say, what about obviously we've done a lot of electrical work together. And my company was going through a stage of, we started out doing a lot of cost plus work, some quoted work, got in with a few builders, and you were one of them, and grew. And obviously, I was a weapon on the tools. Just for anyone that might not have seen me, how good was I out of 10?
Yeah, so there's one incident that I can think of if we're going to bring it up, and you were a weapon on the tool, but there was one time I remember a blind cord at a house on Fort Hacking Road. Have you got memories of that?
Yeah.
Of that speedboard? That's probably so. on the tools, like Greg was one actually, like just to kind of put it in perspective, like you were one of those electricians where you could rock up and you could talk to any client that if I had a defect or there was something on a job and I had to send you, you were the perfect guy for it because you could explain, like they could have had no power in the middle of the night and you could make them feel happy about that. I don't know how, but you could. And that's sort of what you look for in an electrician, and you're a weapon on the tools. But I do remember a speedball through the hand, which was, I don't know how the little muncher hand's going. But
yeah, no, if anyone's watching on YouTube, I got a little angle here. So I slipped with a speedball. I still remember this. It's always stuck with me. I remember what song was playing. It was Grimes, this like fast-paced sort of grungy grime song. And I was standing on the top of a 4-foot ladder, rushing. Like my head was everywhere. I think I was at your job to put 2 blind cords in that have came in and a couple of little things before sheeting, but I didn't have time to do it, but I did it anyway. We had a pub job starting the next day, which I didn't have the staff for, but had to somehow wrangle. I had that hotel group we did work for needing, I think it was 120 rooms fit off. We were taking over from someone else because they couldn't keep at the capacity. And I said yes. And then I remember just rushing, slipping with a brand new 25 speed ball, putting it straight through my index finger, middle finger, jumping off the ladder and just like looking at my hand going, oh no. I think Ethan, your apprentice at the time, like drove me to hospital. And I was just like, well, my biggest concern was how am I going to get to this job tomorrow? Like, what do I do?
That's sort of how you know that you're the owner of a business, when that's your biggest concern.
Yeah, and then I was kind of relieved that I had an excuse not to go. But that was interesting to talk about because that changed my whole business from my perspective. It was where I had to get off the tools because I physically couldn't do anything for 12 weeks. My hand was in that periscope plastic thing. And that was incredible in terms of I don't think I would have got off the tools unless something like that.
Well, it forced you to delegate the work.
Yeah, it forced me. But that was interesting for you as well because, you know, the product you used to pay for, which was me doing the work, then came into like other people who, let's face it, like weren't as good or didn't care as much and that's just like, if you're a business owner or a subcontractor, usually you're the top of your game. Like that, let's face it. And I think that was interesting for you. And we had some sort of, you know, relatively tricky conversations over the years. And lucky enough, I had like a weapon second, third year. But then, you know, what your second, third year growth, what you used to get for X amount, now you get for Y amount when they become a tradie. So navigating all those tricky sort of situations. But like, what do you sort of look for in an electrician? Because I think it's super fair for someone giving you like lots of work to expect a decent rate with a weapon trading. I think that's absolutely fair. It's got to work for both parties. But yeah, so you're looking to work with so like you like working with a business owner, but lots of people do. Yeah, talk us through that. Anything stand out when I was talking?
Yeah, so I guess what you touched on before, that there has to be somebody in the company that can represent your brand. So everything that the client is building, like they've got a business too. So whilst the electricians and whatever trades they are building their business, you've sort of got to recognize the priorities of the business you're working for. So one of those would be that somebody within that organization that you're hiring has to be able to do the I guess to be the face of my business when you're going there to do after service, whether it's maintenance, fix something that's broken, whatever it might be. They have to be able to be a great representation of your company. So that's one of the primary things that I'd look for. And like, that's obviously what we had with Crow Electrical, and the electrician I'm using now, like, he's an absolute weapon as well. But I'm completely understanding you don't get them every job all the time. Like, they've got staff and they'll send staff to the jobs. So there's a level where you're comfortable that the guys that they're sending are competent to do the work, the rate that they're being charged at is still, like, you're still paying them well, the business is making money, but there's that company with someone there that can deliver when the going gets tough. Like, they could step up into a role that might only happen once a year, but you sort of need that problem solved. You've also got to look like sometimes you'll get companies that will have guys that are massively underdone. And if the job's an hourly rate job, like they'll put their gun guys on their priced work and they'll sort of hide those guys on those jobs. And I guess having a broad trade knowledge, it's kind of helped me determine like, hey, that guy's worth it and that guy's not worth it. But ultimately, you're sort of trying to help them grow their company too. So like that feedback is quite often key. Like it's not as if, hey, I'm never using you again because you hired a subby and I didn't like him. Like it's sort of kind of work with the business and understanding that, hey, we're under the pump. So if you want this job done, like this is the guy I've got, like that's what I can offer. And sometimes that's going to be the best case scenario. But I guess it's that communication between what that guy is capable of doing, because you could probably say that the rate that you would charge yourself out at and say one of the tradies that were under you, you were worth 3 times the rate you were charging if you were comparing your rate to what you were having to, like you'd get a switchboard done in a couple of hours that would take them a day. That's, you sort of have to accept that a little bit as a builder. You're not every worker is going to be as good as the boss, but there has to be that sort of fair ground where you're not sending someone underdone at $120 an hour to do a 3-hour job in 2 days.
Yeah, and that's the big thing I like to reference with hourly rate. It's a better question is like who's doing the work, because if I'm $200 an hour and someone else is 100, obviously I look more expensive, but I do it in a day, and they do it in 2 days, then we're the same price. So I always like to sort of bring everyone's attention to that factor. I'm like, not every hour is created equal because every person's a little bit different. And then the consistency of that person is so important. Yeah, want to touch on as well, like I think electricians, and this is, I was fortunate enough to have some really like quality friends, and I think we had a great, and still do have a great friendship group that's like pretty, everyone's wanting to achieve, and like everyone's reading for fun and learning and sort of, you know, doing some cool stuff in multiple industries. But like I think one thing that being around a lot of builders exposed me to was the other factors at play. So a lot of times electrically, you're like, your electrical contract is 3 to 5%, maybe 10% of automation of the job. So $1 million job, you're like 50 grand, you know, something along those lines of work. So there's lots of other factors at play. So lots of times electricians can feel that, oh, that builder's super annoying. Oh my gosh, they're so disorganized. They just call me to come in. But lots of your movements are determined by other trades, interest rates. So just talk us through, like, you know, what kind of stuff do you deal with that you would like know, not known to the electrical public, but just so people can be more aware of having a greater understanding of the holistic job. They're not like a major part of the job in the nicest way possible. Like, yes, go get the power on, but it's a pretty small component in the context of a full build. So just chat us through some of that stuff.
Yeah, so I guess like they're obviously a super important part of the job, but what you would find is there's a critical path schedule for a job. So typically the house, like on a new build, your house will get demolished, the slab will go down, walls up, roof on, gyprock, kitchens, etc. Now, if you fit off your kitchen splashback power point on day 90 or day 120 of that schedule, it's probably not going to change the end date. Like, it's sort of like there's a critical path through that project, and maybe like the rough-in will fall on that schedule. So frames will get up, the roof will get on, we need to get it. And electricians like, oh, they're sheeting tomorrow, they're sheeting. Like, you always hear electricians referring to, oh, that job's getting sheeted, because it's probably one of those rare times that they've found themselves on the critical path where the builder's pushing for that to be a priority. So sometimes you'll find that on bigger jobs, like the crane will be lifting all like the structural steel and the formwork, and you go, oh, can you get my cables to level 2? And like they'll kind of tell you to get lost, because like the structure is the priority, the critical path the priority. So that's sort of one thing that what I like about sort of having the trades where they're paid for that time. Like if someone prices a job and bulkheads aren't built and you don't have wardrobes and you kind of, it doesn't perfectly work for the electrician, quite often the builder's completely aware of that. And if that rough-in takes 1 or 2 days extra, they're happy to pay for that to be the case. If it means the transition between the framing finishing and the sheeting starting is only like a 1 or 2 day turnaround, if they have to finish every single bit of the frame and then get an electrician to come and have the job to himself, and then the plumber comes the next day and has the job to himself, these timeframes of builds just push out and out and out, creating that perfect environment. So quite often some trades have to work in an environment that may not be their ideal scenario, but for the schedule of the project, that potentially could be the best case scenario.
Yeah, it's interesting, and this is reference to say cost plus versus quoted work. And I remember being on a few of your sites, and we're working over like gyprock and you know, heaps of people, and not all the time, but occasionally it's like, hey, look, the gyprock has given us these dates, so they've pushed me 2 weeks forward. So a lot of times things can be outside, and weather is another thing, right? Like if the weather is right or wrong, can greatly affect the critical pathway of the whole build. And then you've got other trades, so things like tiling or plasterers or painters can affect, oh, they're pushing me forward because they've got to go to that job, I've got to get them in, I need you in at this point. So a lot of times the decisions you guys make is governed by someone else, and sometimes it's governed by a higher power, which might be, hey, the market's super hot, I've got to sell this, or I've got a buyer coming in at this point. Or it might be, hey, interest is cooking me right now, and if we're out 6 weeks early, I can save, you know, 10 to 20 to $30,000. So a lot of times I think it's really important to factor in that, you know, you're not the biggest fish in the pond, but you've got to be the most, you got to be the easiest fish to deal with. And you like, if people don't notice you, you're doing a good job, I think. Thoughts around that?
I wouldn't necessarily say they don't notice you. Like it's obviously like they're a key part of the job, and a lot of the parts of the electrical are super critical.
I guess I was referring to like, I was referring to, you got to be easy to deal with, you know?
That's sort of where that model works for us, because there is a lot of times where we're not giving the best case scenario in terms of, oh yeah, well, when I quoted this job, like I was expecting no other trade on site, every wall to be built, and it was like every little bit of the corner of the job was vacuumed, and I was coming into a clean, perfect environment. That's not necessarily always or potentially ever going to happen for the jobs that you've priced. So there's 1 or 2 things that are going to happen based on previous experience for other builders that you're going to have to quote higher to allow for that. But then I guess one thing that we sort of factor in to our job, and over time, like I've sort of been involved with trades other than just the carpentry. Like we sort of have in-house, like there's plumbing, and whilst the electrical is done by, like we've got like a contractor that does the electrical, I'm very well aware of what he's going to require to make his job easier. So like a lot of our jobs, like the duplexes we build, will have like a service corridor. So you've got a direct highway for cables and services to get to the kitchen, whether that be within a side roof. And often that rough-in will be scheduled to pull that maybe just prior to the roof sheets, and then all the fit off can be done once the roof's on, but you can get that through efficiently. So if you can potentially offer that like convenience, it's a fine line, because if you get someone that's priced the work and they've allowed for this worst case scenario, and then you're offering these absolute perfect kind of circumstances, but then on the very next job that might not. So it's very hard for someone to price a job without it sort of, I guess, being skewed one way or the other.
Yeah, it's so interesting, and that's one thing that you were always so incredibly thoughtful with, like cable pathways and bits and pieces. And I think that having that awareness, but I just like everyone to also just be super aware that you got to work with people. And I know sometimes like the complaint about builders is they're disorganized and they'll push us forward or push us back. And a lot of times it's out of their hands. Like I said, weather or other trades sort of letting them down, or they have to send their team to a different job, or they've got the B team on this one, or the client's changed something. So lots of times like that. What advice would you have to someone wanting to sort of bust into that builder space? Like, I don't know if you get heaps of phone calls from people or Alex does or whatever, but like, what advice would you have? You know, if someone cold called you, you'd probably have zero context. And I don't know how they would have your number in the first place, but let's say they got your number. Like, would you give someone, under what situation would you give someone a shot?
Well,
and I know your current Sparky, so I'm not saying like call James, but like, it's just good for people to
no, but
know,
what? Well, I've only ever had two Sparkies. It's been yourself and my current Sparky. So I guess I'm in that situation where like I'm happy with the relationships that I've built. And when we go back to sort of talking about like the pays and things earlier, and one thing that's super important for me from the experiences that I've been through is like all of our trades, like we pay straight away. Like if they send an invoice, it's always before the due date, but quite often it's like that week, if not that day. And we build that relationship with our trades. So then if I have a situation and they have to make a decision, hey, what builder do I work for? If you're the builder that hasn't backcharged them and you always pay on time, they're usually going to prioritize your work anyway. So that's sort of like where that relationship you build, someone isn't necessarily just going to be able to send you an email like, or give you a quick phone call and all of that goes out the window. So it's certainly going to be hard to crack. Like if you're an up and coming electrician trying to build a new client base, like I guess all of those years we did electrical together, whether we got 100 inquiries or not, like we were never really looking for someone new. So I guess that's sort of where I guess like what happened earlier when we were younger in those networks, like try and grow with builders that are growing. Like if you're a young guy in your 20s, find builders in their 20s, and quite often you'll probably still be their electrician when they're retiring. Like it's sort of, yeah, that's one element. And then getting in with those big experienced builders is obviously what you're wanting to do, but you sort of got to find a way to prove yourself to them first. Like it's not as if they're going to just trust you for a big job off the back of your phone call.
100%. I love that. I love that, like the strength of the relationship and the importance of, I think, on site. Like I always encourage everyone to break bread with the business owners, or to break when the site breaks. So we had sites, so obviously we worked at a lot of sites that either broke twice or broke once. No one broke 3 times for some reason, but that would have been fantastic. But sitting down with people, talking to them, getting to know them. Lots of our relationship was built on site, and that was great.
Well,
like just talking.
I remember one thing you would do would be like you would make a conscious effort to have lunch with our team, and if your guys would actually go and have lunch in their car, like for you that would actually bother you because you're like, no, like this is your opportunity to integrate with these guys and for them to be comfortable with you. Like, I don't know, correct me if I'm wrong, but I do feel like that was something that you brought to Crow Electrical, where the relationship that your staff had with the builder's staff was important to the overall success of your business.
Oh, 100%. I was a massive believer of breaking bread with everyone and not being on your phone. It was huge for me too, unless it was some like heaps funny video or something. But like even then, and but just eating with people, talking to people, being genuinely interested, and the amount of people I saw as apprentices, you come through and you might either help them out, or maybe I had like spare tools or spare batteries. You give them something, and they end up running a business. And you underestimate that the 20-year-olds turn 30 at some point, and the 30-year-olds turn 40, and the growth of people within that realm. Most builders start. I think you guys did you start at your mum's house with that your parents' house, sorry, with that sunken bath? Is that?
I think you're referring to somebody else's project. That certainly wasn't me.
But you did bits and like obviously that was funny. But yeah, super interesting. I think like we would play OzTag together, and I think the importance of just being in and around the people you work with and enjoying their company. And it makes those tough conversations so much easier when you've got to have them. And everyone will have to have them. If you work with someone long enough, something's going to go on that's going to bother you in both directions. So you encourage people to, just sort of be where they're at. And I think a lot of people want that high-end residential job, but until you've proven yourself, until you've done it, you're not going to get it. Like, no one's going to take a risk on some punter. But if you're in the game for long enough, they probably will be like, oh, that's this person's capable, they can handle it, and the reputation sort of precedes that. So yeah, I also want to touch base on. I know you've had a lot of apprentices through the years, something that's been pretty passionate, like training people through it. Why do you go down that route?
Yeah, I guess over the years the market has changed. I guess going back to sort of early stages of business, then we had that financial crisis, and then you're just swamped with people looking for work. You can very easily get a contractor or get someone in to do that, like do work. There's tradesmen available. But then fast forward to like the back of COVID, and they put all of this government stimulus in place, and there's home grants and all of this kind of work going on. You had a massive shortage of tradespeople and good tradespeople, which is the case today. Quite often, someone that can, I guess, sort of represent your business the best way possible sort of has to be taught the values of your business from the start. Like, you can't just get a guy in for a week here or a week there and expect that to be a true reflection of your business. So training guys to sort of be part of your business and have your business values is sort of one reason for it. And I guess the other reason is we've got an extremely unique business model now, which, like, I don't know too many builders that have so many in-house elements to their building, like what I was mentioning before with like the pools, the slabs, the frames, the plumbing, like even the spray gun, like for all the painting, like the painters come in after that.
I still reckon you got the spray gun just to feel like Arnold Schwarzenegger.
Yeah, just to come through and hit everything. So I guess the diversity of trades and Alex giving me the ability to be on site all the time, I've wanted to keep stimulating myself and learning new things. So I'm constantly learning new trades and new elements to the building. Like, I guess it's my hobby. Like, that's sort of what I would enjoy doing, even if I retire. But what that's created is a super diverse workplace where it actually becomes a little bit hard to hire the right staff. That the same carpenter that can do a door can form a pool, that can tie steel. And not that every apprentice is doing all of those particular elements. Like, some of them might gravitate to just sort of the framing carpentry. Others that have a building focus might kind of go, I want to learn a bit about framing, but like it's the slabs and all of that stuff, the concrete, that I'm interested in. But when you hire tradesmen that have come from, like, oh, I'm a framer, a lot of them have never even been on a building site that doesn't have a concrete slab on the ground. So if you're getting them to set out piers and do things like that, quite often the guy that you're hiring has less experience than our apprentices because they're not diverse. So I guess the apprentice structure that we've sort of had has created that, I guess, diversity. Because years ago, a lot of carpenters could do more than a lot of the guys can do today. Like, the guys that are sort of coming out of an apprenticeship on a high-rise unit, they're not as well-rounded as, say, like the guys that are retiring.
Yeah, and I even reference that to sort of, oh, you're on skirting, you're on architrave. We see it electrically a lot. Like, sometimes I talk to people who they did their whole apprenticeship on like the lighting A&Es, just like loop around. Now that was my job, from unit to unit to unit, like no switchwise. So, just like this stuff, our data cable or cable tray or bits and pieces, the diversified approach. And I think the fact that you can offer that is huge. And probably, if you've got a good apprentice, most a good third year's worth their absolute weight in gold. A lot of times we would have tradies come in 3 to 5 years experience with 3 to 5 years experience. And I'm like, my second year is better than you. So it's absolutely huge. So full credit to you in the industry. Now you're like I think this is the 4th or 5th lounge room pod what we've done, and everyone's shared a similar sort of nature that they would do it for fun. They'd probably be in the game, just like they love what they do. How important is like enjoying the process, enjoying the business and being genuinely interested? Like, how does that help you?
Yeah, I feel like that's kind of the only reason you can sustain it for a long period of time. Like anyone can wake up in the morning and go and do something to get paid, but there becomes a point where you originally did that for $100 when you're an apprentice, and then you did it for a couple of $100, and it becomes a point where if you're not enjoying it, you're just not going to want to do it. So that's sort of, I guess, now some certain things, like I'm not saying you can only enjoy well, there's certain elements that you have to do and get done, but growing your business, delegating some of the tasks you don't like and doing the tasks you do like, it's a major part to staying motivated long term. Like I can't sort of see anyone having a business that is thriving for 50 years that they've hated from day one. Like you have to enjoy it.
Yeah, 100%. And yeah, you are going to go through tough times, obviously, but like the general is like, I think that business thing is in someone or it's not. And if it is, you owe it to yourself to prove it. Now we're going to go wrap it up with a bit of a lightning round. So give us some financial or business advice that you would tell yourself at 20. Fully on the spot. I should have actually.
That was fully on the spot. So
yeah, but you know how you asked for like what give me some prep questions. I'm like, this would have actually been ideal prep question.
Do you know what? This is a controversial one, but it would be like, this is like the opposite to most people's perspective, and even my accountant thinks it's weird. But you hear so many like traders, oh, I'm doing this cash job, or I'm going to do this, and I would say, if you're getting paid for the work, like pay the tax, declare the money, because most people I know that are doing really well have kind of done that on the back of property as well. So like, you're not going to go and get a home loan if you've done all of your weekend for cashies. Like that's probably one of the things that when I was young, I'd be like, oh, I'm going to go and buy all these tools because they're tax deductible. And like you're not saying don't do that if you need them, but you hear people, I'm going to upgrade my car because I don't want to pay tax. And if you can get your income up high enough to then get the loans lead to opportunities, whether it's getting your foot in the door for property or having a house already and getting the loan to be able to renovate it and add value. Like I think when people are younger, they don't emphasize the importance of the lending. And obviously property's been such like a side element to the construction, like whether it's investing in property, building and selling property, that couldn't happen without the loans and strong financials. And I guess a lot of young guys today probably misunderstand the importance of that.
Yeah, that's huge. And long-term property too, right? Like accumulated over time. Just that sort of set and forget, roll through. All right, what about 30? Advice you give yourself at 30? Just seems like yesterday, doesn't it?
Oh, geez, it wasn't really a flash answer, was it? It's
Is it the same? Like it could be the same.
Yeah, a lot of guys sort of drop the ball around 32, I think, because your priorities change, like kids, family, interests. Like I reckon that's where the hardest time to stay motivated is in that period of life when you're starting to get other things come along. So I don't know if that really answers the question, but I guess it's just staying focused through your 30s can sometimes be harder than in your 20s when you're super passionate.
Yeah, especially when you get some little ones and some like a bit of lack of sleep in there, and you can't just do what you want anymore. And with those little kids, I mean, I've got 2, you've got 4, so you would know much more than me on that factor. And then sort of final sign off, like if you had one shot, one opportunity to sort of wrap everything up, or a bit of advice you wanted to give to someone, yeah, what would it be? What would your final sign up be? This could be like a life lesson, could be a motto, could be like I don't know, inspirational comment. What do you think?
Yeah, it would be just what we touched on before, is find a way to enjoy it. Like, just sort of try and tweak it in a direction that you're going to stay motivated. You're going to want to wake up and do it. And then that's probably the key to it being successful.
Love that. Thanks for your time, James. Builder extraordinaire, developer, property mogul.
Thanks, Crowy. Good to chat.
See you, mate.
Yeah.